Hi everyone, welcome to another video review. This time we are reviewing The Medium, an Xbox Series X exclusive game available on Game Pass right now. If you don't know me, I'm Delilah, aka ASSASSINA-san. Welcome back to my channel. So I'll just preface this by saying The Medium was my top 10 most anticipated games of 2021. And after beating the game, I can confidently say that it fell way below my expectations. Now, I didn't have some crazy expectations because I've played Bloober Team games before, like Layers of Fear and Blair Witch, and they were like okay games. They weren't anything out of this world, but I still enjoyed my time with them. I would say that The Medium is definitely an evolution for Bloober Team, but not necessarily an evolution for next gen, or current gen rather, like the new generation. But even with being a more graphically impressive game than, let's say, Blair Witch or Layers of Fear, and definitely seeing how much this team has grown, I still feel like I had less fun with The Medium than I did with Blair Witch or Layers of Fear. Even though The Medium is more graphically impressive in comparison to the previous game, I still somehow enjoyed the previous games a lot more than this one. I think part of the reason why I enjoyed those games more in comparison to this one is because I did come into it with a lot higher expectations, considering it was the first Xbox Series X exclusive game coming to the platform. So I thought that this was going to be some kind of showcase of what the current generation has to offer. Instead, what I got was a game that felt held back by really archaic mechanics, and we'll get into that in a bit. Let's start with the purpose of The Medium. It's supposed to be a narrative-driven game. It has no combat, it is all puzzle solving and story. It's kind of like Until Dawn, but not as action-focused, a little more psychological thriller. So you're playing as Marianne, who's the medium, and what this means is she has access to the world of the dead and the world of the living. They call it the spirit world. She receives a mysterious call from a guy who seems to know that she has these abilities, seems to know who she is, but we don't know who that guy is. And he asked her to meet him at this Soviet Union resort called the Niwa Resort. It's rundown, it's abandoned. It sounds like a really cool setting for a horror game, doesn't it? But you spend the bulk of the game trying to figure out who this man is, who you are, what you play in the world. You learn about the resort and what happened before you got there. You try and figure out why it's abandoned. And then Marianne uses her parallel world abilities to navigate the game, specifically to solve puzzles. I spent the entire game having thousands of questions about what's going on, and every time I got more answers, I had more questions. In fact, I even ended the game with more questions, which is totally fine because I like the idea of having an ending where you can speculate and try and figure out what's gonna happen next or what happened in this world. So the story kept its hooks in me because I always had questions. I always wanted to know what was happening next. That's pretty good storytelling, I think. The problem is most of the storytelling was told in notes and in these things called echoes, which kind of are data pads where you hear voiceovers of what's going on with people who have been at the resort or people who have experienced this world as it is. I'm being vague purposely to avoid spoilers. And having the story told through notes and data pads instead of cinematic experiences, one, felt lazy, and two, felt really sloppy because I'm sure there's some notes that I missed that would have given me some more data into the world, but because I didn't get every single thing, now I have this kind of disjointed story. I don't mind notes and data pads being used as supplemental information, things like side characters, which we do learn about some characters in this game that aren't core to the story, maybe a little information about the Niwa Resort. Those are totally fine, but when you're using notes and data pads as part of the full narrative experience, I feel like it really takes away from a game whose purpose is to be a narrative experience. It's not like this is a super cool, action-y combat fun game. It's a narrative game. All I'm doing is learning about what's happening and solving puzzles. The thing is, when you have a game that the biggest elements to it are narrative experience and puzzles, and you take the narrative experience and you execute it in a lazy way, aka by notes and data pads, instead of creating some really cool cinematic experiences, then it makes me feel like why I'm even playing the game. It could have just been a puzzle game. Maybe that was the purpose. I don't know. I feel like the only reason why I stood engaged in the story is because it kept me wondering what is going on and why. But at the end of the day, the story did keep its hooks in me, and it was one of the better elements of this game. However, when we get into gameplay, that was a little bit more of a roller coaster. I really was excited about this gameplay because of this upside down parallel world perspective. It kind of reminded me of Stranger Things, which I'm really into, except in a game. So I was really curious to see how they would implement the parallel world into gameplay and into storytelling. At first, I was really impressed with how the game was using the world of the living and the spirit world to proceed. It was really cool how you had to pay attention to both perspectives in order to see which side of the world you needed to interact with to activate something else in the other world. For example, let's say you had to turn on a generator, which is a classic horror game objective, and you didn't have any power, so then you can go into the spirit world, find a way to gather some energy, and then once you find that energy in the spirit world, you can activate the generator and then have the energy available in the real world to then like turn on a light or something like that. I thought the parallel world perspective was really unique and ambitious, but I think what really held it back from being good is the fixed camera perspective. The fixed camera perspective is an archaic system that was successful in maybe the PlayStation 2 era, but I feel like it's one of those gameplay perspectives that doesn't work well in 2021. There's retro style of gameplay like 2D platformers that still work in 2021, but I feel like the fixed camera perspective is so limiting visually and feels clunky when you're controlling it that I don't think it's worth adopting in 2021. I feel like we moved away from it for a reason. It just feels too clunky. It's too slow paced and it's very visually limiting. I hated that oftentimes I couldn't see where I needed to go. Part of that is because it was very dark, part of that is because I have shitty vision, but I think the biggest bulk of it is that with the fixed camera perspective, you can't pan the camera around to see where to go next. And the game didn't really do a good job in leading you into what area you needed to go to next. I feel like the fixed camera perspective made the split world gameplay less enticing. I would love to see this unique gameplay concept of the split world be implemented into a game that has a more free-flowing camera so that there's more room for exploration and so that I get less of a headache. It was really, really difficult to try and figure out where I'm going on, where the camera zoom all the way out, and I have two worlds to look at and I'm trying to explore and see what item markers are popping up on what side. It gave me a headache way too many times, and I think it's a flaw. It's really a shame that such a unique gameplay concept is really being held back by an archaic system. The fixed camera perspective was definitely the worst part of this game, but it wasn't just that felt archaic. There were other gameplay elements in the medium that felt extremely dated and just don't work well in video games anymore. For example, having to go across a ledge at a very slow pace to get to the other side, or going across a balancing beam and trying to balance your controller so that you don't fall over and over again, especially in that level with all the filing cabinets. If you played it, you know what I'm talking about. These gameplay elements just don't feel good anymore in 2021. It would maybe worked and felt unique in the PS3 Uncharted 1 era from what I could remember, but in 2021, it just feels like it's holding back this game that has some potential. The gameplay loop initially felt interesting. I was pretty intrigued by the puzzle solving with the different worlds, but it quickly became stale because of how frustrating it was to navigate. It got to a point where I just wanted to see what was happening in the story and I didn't even want to bother with the gameplay, and that's pretty bad for a game that doesn't have much else going for it. And then on top of it, you have the environment and the atmosphere, which felt completely uninspired. Usually with horror games, that's the strong point. Even with Bloober Team games, I was pretty impressed with the environment of the castle in Layers of Fear, or the woods in Blair Witch. And you would think an abandoned resort sounds like a pretty dope location for a horror game, but it just lacked so much detail. I felt like I was exploring a generic building. There were certain parts of the game that were really cool, like when you get to the lower parts of the resort and you start seeing like dead bodies in walls and you learn more about things that went down at the resort. But there was nothing about the environment that made me feel like I was exploring an abandoned resort during the Soviet Union. I just didn't have as much fun exploring the resort as much as I thought when first arriving with Marianne, and maybe part of that was because of the fixed camera perspective and I couldn't really explore it anyway. I don't know. What really saved this game is the sound design. Now, I'm not surprised. Bloober Team is pretty good at this. They create a lot of horror games. The sound design was pretty horrific. Not just the music playing in the background, but also the sound of the demon, which is the main villain in this game. The music score and sound design made the atmosphere feel a lot more unsettling than it would have been had there not been any music, because visually it was very bland. The whole game had filters over it, like a blue filter or a green filter, orange, red. That's totally fine. I'm okay with that, especially if you want to distinguish between the world of the living and the spirit world. But none of the details in the environment were good enough to make me feel uncomfortable visually as a game like, let's say, Resident Evil 7, where every corner of the Baker house freaked me the hell out, music or not. Now, I'm not saying that the game needs to be as like grotesque or scary as Resident Evil 7. They're very different games, but if you're going for a horror psychological thriller experience, you definitely don't just want to create tension with music, you want to create tension with environment. In fact, environment, atmosphere, sound design are the core elements to a good horror game. But I would say hands down, music and sound design is the strongest element of the medium. So the big question is, do I think this game is worth your time and money? No, it's not worth your money. The fact that it's on Game Pass is really helping the game a lot, because you can go in, play a few hours and see if it's a game for you. I do recommend you try it, because I can see this appealing to some people. Just keep in mind that this game is narrative and puzzles, and that's it. Do I think it's worth your time? I would say no. What made the medium not feel like a complete waste of time is the nice graphics, the unique concept, a mysterious story, and a good sound design, but otherwise I felt like the medium may feel like a waste of time for many people. So I don't really think that the story and the sound and the concept justifies the lack of good gameplay and the lack of an inspired atmosphere and the lack of really good storytelling. This feels like a step forward for Bloober Team in terms of graphics and concept, but it feels like a step back for the new generation of gaming. I feel like this title could have gone so much farther if they just simply did away with the fixed camera angles and if they offered more environmental details. I think had I paid for this game, I would have been really upset. I just want to make it clear that although I feel like this is a step back for the new generation of gaming, before a team like Bloober Team, this definitely feels like a step forward, and playing the medium doesn't turn me off to their games in the future. In fact, it makes me more intrigued to see what they're going to do next, because I definitely see a growth in the studio, and I think if they take the feedback from this game and make some changes for their next game, I think they'll have a really solid title on their hands. Like I said, this game had a lot of potential. It was just held back by really archaic gameplay loops. I don't think this is a must play, but if you do have a few hours on your hands and maybe you want to sit down with a friend and have some popcorn and have like a movie night kind of experience, it's not really a bad pick, but I don't think it's something that you have to play. I think you can maybe skip this one. So if you played the medium, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you disagree with me. I'm always open to hearing feedback of not just my videos, but of my perspectives. It helps me learn, it helps me grow as a content creator and just as a human being. Everyone has different opinions, and I always accept those with open arms. So I would love to hear your experiences on the medium. And any feedback you have for my channel is always very much so appreciated. There's things that have to do with bells and thumbs up and likes and subscribing that helps me, I think. But I'm really bad at plugging that stuff. If you want to help me, I think doing those things would help. I don't think I explained that well. whatever. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video helped you inform your decision of whether you should play the medium or not. And I'm looking forward to the next one with you guys. Looking forward to reviewing other 2021 games. All right, take care, guys.